Here comes Amy, bringing the grim. Hello and welcome to Lexitecture, a podcast about word origins and histories. My name is Ryan, and in each episode my friend Amy and I bring a new pair of words to share their stories with each other and you. You can find our past episodes and the occasional blog post on our website at lexitecture.com. Follow along with us on Twitter and Facebook at Lexitecture, and if you really like what we do, you can support the show at patreon.com/lexitecture.
Today's episode, Crazy Sleep.
Before we get wording, huge shout out of thanks to Anne Chastain for supporting us on Patreon, our latest Patreon supporter. Hooray!
Woo!
Cool people
Super
doing
duper
cool
Annie
stuff.
Chastain, good vibes.
Yeah, so all of our Patreon supporters, thank you very much. Patreon.com/Lexitecture. Hashtag always
thank you guys.
be plugging. Yeah,
we really, really do. We really appreciate it.
It's fantastic. So let's get wording, as you say. How about I go first this time, and then you can...
Yeah, cool.
Okay.
To the words!
To the words. My word today is crazy.
Ooh!
Yeah, I like it. So, this was... I don't know why this came to me. I just decided to look at it. I think maybe I was reminiscing about the... This is a total tangent. This is really way too early to start this. But did you ever find when you were teaching in Korea that you had to explain the difference between the way we use crazy and the two different Korean words, the pabo and michin, were like...
I was specifically told in my first school in Korea not to ever use the word crazy to the children.
Yeah, I was not given that instruction, and then I used it, and it was
wasn't
in trouble.
like that wasn't a reaction to me having done it. It's not like I was like crazy this and crazy that and crazy the next thing. No mention of crazy had happened. The director took us aside and said, just so you know, we don't use that word here. And we were all like, okay. That's
odd.
Sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I had to learn the difference between, like, the kids would like lose their mind when I would say it. And I was like, hold on. It doesn't mean something different here because it's still English and it still means a thing. But what is
that
this?
That word does not mean what you think
no,
it means.
And so I had to learn the two words that, like, pabo, which just means like sort of foolish and silly and whatever else. And it's kind of a fun word, like we use crazy here. But then michin is like the word for like genuinely like psychopathic and insane. And that's the one they always thought crazy just meant.
Yeah.
So anyway, long story short, there shouldn't have been that story because it's irrelevant. So,
it's not really irrelevant.
No, it's not really. It's the word that I'm doing. So
exactly.
The earliest OED reference to the word the adjective crazy is in 1576.
Oh,
but
that's much earlier than I was expecting for some reason.
Yeah, but what it meant originally in this instance was, quote, having bodily health or constitution impaired, indisposed or ailing, diseased or sickly, broken down, frail, or infirm. So it was a physical, if you were crazy, like you were badly injured or diseased or decrepit or whatever.
That's cool. It's not cool. You know what I mean.
Yeah. A little bit later, it meant, so 1583 was the citation, it meant sort of full of cracks or flaws, damaged or impaired, liable to break or fall into pieces, or shaky, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then, it's okay, so this part was weird. So the earliest citation that the OED has was 1617, but it's kind of a translation. So it's the earliest citation of crazy, meaning sort of unsound mind.
Right.
But it's a 1617 text whose English was modernized in the 1800s. So I don't know whether to count that or not, like the OED does, but it does leave that annotation that it's modernized text. So after 1617, and the other reason I kind of go, really? That seems like a later kind of a retconning almost. But in 1674 is the next earliest usage in the OED of crazy, meaning like in the head. Mm-hmm. So there is an older, well, not really older, there's a related noun, the related noun craze.
I was wondering about craze, as in like glaze and ceramics.
Oh, right. Okay. I didn't see
You
any
weren't
of
thinking
that.
of that.
No,
I'll
I wasn't
stop
thinking of
interrupting and let you go on.
that. So the related noun craze is from around the same time, but again, in the earliest use, it meant a crack or a cleft or a flaw or something, like a physical break was called a craze. And it wasn't until 1813 that we get a reference to craze as like an insane or irrational fancy or a mania, some sort of obsession. So that's much later.
Yeah.
But the earliest, by far the earliest formation of craze is as a verb. So you craze something, which goes back to the late 1300s, that means to break by concussion or violent pressure, to break in pieces or asunder, or to shatter.
Ah, that's very specific.
It's very specific, yeah. And
like, not just break it. No. I don't want you to break it. I want you to craze it.
craze it.
Okay.
Oh, I get it. Gotcha. So give it some mustard. And then again, it takes a long time before the sort of mental psychological sense comes around. And it's like the early 1500s. There's a letter from the Earl of Oxford that talks about someone's brother or broder being so troubled with sickness and crazed in his mind. And like there will come a day when I'll get to Kevin Stroud levels of mellifluousness with Middle English pronunciation, but it is not this day. So you get the modern English version of that sentence, but you get the idea. So
I could honestly just listen to Kevin read in Middle English and Old English. Just if his podcast was just that, I'd still tune in.
I'd absolutely still listen. Yeah, for sure.
When I was an undergraduate and we started studying Middle English, it was it was a compulsory module. It seemed that they felt that people were so turned off by Middle English that they made it compulsory, so everybody did it. And one of the things that happened in this kind of, hey guys, we're not so bad after all, was that two of my lecturers, the wonderful Ian Johnson and Rhiannon. Oh, I've forgotten what Rhiannon's other name was. They did a reading of some of the Canterbury Tales, and it was just great. You know, it was, and of course there's parts that you don't understand that well, and people were like following along with their annotated Canterbury Tales to try and just like make sense of it, but it just sounded so cool.
Yeah, it definitely, yeah. I would like to, at some point I will, like I say, but not yet.
Not today.
So, and then the next crazed, other than that one letter from the Earl of Oxford, is in King Lear, 1608, with the line, "The grief has crazed my wits." So
I'm interested in how all of these still, like, we hear the word crazed and we think, okay, crazy, but actually they still maintain that sense of a thing that is broken, crazed in the mind and crazed wits. They're, they're still things that are not as they should be, things that have been broken in some way.
yeah, but we've lost. I think we've lost the physical. Like someone's not crazed if they've just got a broken arm and a broken leg.
No, not at all. No, that sense wouldn't come across these days. I wouldn't have thought.
In the early days, that was the thing. So, crazy comes from craze, which then comes from craze, the verb. So the verb is the oldest. And the OED posits two possible etymologies for this. And this is interesting. It was interesting to read this because it's not... I find the OED is either content to just say origin obscure, some people say this, some people say this, or just origin obscure and leave it at that. Mm-hmm. But in this time, they said that there is a word, acraze, A-C-R-A-Z-E. And it basically says we have evidence for this in the 16th century, but if it's much older, if it is older than craze, then craze is aphetic, which is a word I learned, meaning the process of a word losing its initial sound.
Oh, nice.
Right? And so it's aphetic for a craze, so the A just dropped off and it became craze.
Is it a PH or is it an F? I'll have to ask.
APH.
Aphetic.
APHETIC.
I'm enjoying it more because of that PH.
Oh, definitely. Yum. Yeah, with the F it wouldn't be the same. So, yeah, like if a craze is older, then that's probably what happened. Mm-hmm. And then if that's the case, a craze would come from Old French écraser, which is a variant of écraser, which is apparently of Norse origin, which sort of seems like a bit of a weird jump, because I don't see a lot of words that progress from French to Norse to English. Usually they're two kind of separate silos.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's, I don't know, maybe that's a mark against it, that it's less common for that to happen. If craze is older, then the assumption is that it just comes straight from the Scandinavian word, and it's aphetic of the Scandinavian Old Norse word that has the... When we did that crossover episode with Talk the Talk, that has now, or will soon be relaunching as Because Language, remember the difficulty I had pronouncing Schwiergard? Because Swedish is impossible. It was like that. I saw these things and it had these various Swedish words and I was like, oh, I could do this. And then I remembered that. I had an instant like sort of flashback a la Vietnam War films. And I went, no, I can't do it.
Etymology flashbacks.
Yeah, it was brutal. So anyway, yeah. So apparently it comes from a Norse word that basically meant the same thing, like to break or to dash into pieces. Or you get that sort of broken element. So with that note,
if there's any kind of Norse dashing into pieces, we have to remember one of my most favourite moments from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is Thor, newly arrived on Earth, in a coffee shop, dashing his empty cup to the ground.
Yes.
Every time I see that, I want to be him.
Yes. Oh, I think everyone has that moment where they want to do that. Just down a pint and then just smash the glass on the ground and call for another.
With some sort of hurrah kind of noise. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's something you would do while you were quaffing, isn't it?
Oh, you would quaff a pint and then smash it.
There's quaffing involved.
It. You would quaff and
the
craze.
The quaffing and the crazing.
I think we might have a new mug. We might have a new mug.
Assuming that pubs ever get to exist again, the quaff and craze would be a good name.
Oh, that'd be amazing. Well, now we have to own a pub.
And I feel that horns of animals, or at least synthetic horns of animals, are going to feature heavily in the decor of that pub.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Almost exclusively. If I can find a way to make chairs out of horns, I will. So I'll wrap up with good old Smith. And Smith lists craziness is the closest thing he has in his synonyms discriminated.
It's the closest thing to crazy?
Yeah.
Did I just go out of my way to, at least in my head, humorously drop a Katie Milieu song into our podcast?
It was a long walk, but we all appreciate it.
It would appear I did.
So craziness is listed under madness. And he says, craziness is the imbecility of a broken down intellect, and as it were a decrepit state of mind. It is commonly the result of age or severe mental pressure of trial, and is often accompanied by hallucination in connection with personal life and history. Ooh. So my traumatic etymological flashbacks are a sign of my crazy imbecility of a broken down intellect and my decrepit state of mind, apparently. So up yours, Smith.
How come Smith even manages to make things that are mildly offensive sound so beautiful?
Right? It's crazy.
Why have PTSD when you can have hallucinations signaling
in connection with
it's What a dude. We love Smith.
What a guy. Yeah, so that's crazy.
I'm thinking about, I recall when, again, more university flashbacks, when I was at St Andrews, we had a visit. When I was doing my creative writing masters, we had a visit from a professor she was actually a visiting professor in the School of Psychology, but she had a kind of a side hustle as the visiting professor for the creative writing course. And she is a very well-respected doctor called Kay Redfield Jameson. And the reason that she was on the creative writing course, the reason that they were bothered enough to get her to come and talk to us, is that she had written a memoir called An Unquiet Mind, which is an absolutely fantastic read. And An Unquiet Mind is about... So she's a psychologist, psychiatrist, sorry, she's a psychiatrist and professor of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins, author of textbooks, seminal this, that, and the next thing. You know, a very well-respected professional within that field, who is also bipolar.
Oh.
And who wasn't diagnosed as being bipolar until she was already a doctor.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And her memoir talks about, it talks about lots of things. It talks about her, you know, her kind of, her life and her journey and how she came to realise that this was the case, and treatment and all the stuff that goes on with that. It's an absolutely fantastic book. It's beautifully written, but it's also a great story. And one of the things that she talked about, she was working on a second book when she was talking to us that was about exuberance and madness. And I mean, the word exuberant is one that I feel just doesn't get enough airtime.
No.
And she had been studying people who display this natural, energetic zest for life that other people just don't exhibit. And she talked about various commonalities. I liked her so much that I went to her lecture in the School of Psychology too, where she talked in much more kind of scientific detail about what she was doing and what her project was about. But she talked about these things, and one of the things that she mentioned was her use of the word crazy and madness, and how she was occasionally contacted by people to say, I want you to stop using those words. You can't talk about us like that.
Right.
And she kind of started her response by saying, I talk about me like that too. I am one of you. And she kept that really quite well concealed for a lot of years from her colleagues whose job it was to diagnose people with mental illnesses. Other story. But she talked about how it hadn't ever really occurred to her that this word was offensive, and that she certainly, as an individual, didn't find it offensive, because she felt that madness was the only accurate descriptor for how she kind of felt during those periods of time in her life when she was ill. And yeah, it's interesting because at that time I didn't know I was crazy. And then later in my life was very definitely medically crazy and given pills and, you know, sent off to talk to professionals and all that kind of thing. And I remember remarking about that time in my life that I thought I was really cool and done and woke about mental illness and the stigma around people who were mentally ill until it happened to me. And then I was like, oh, no, goodness me, no, fuck that shit. Having all the sympathy in the world for another person's craziness doesn't necessarily extend to your own.
Right.
And it's funny because I will often say, oh yeah, that time when I was crazy, and people respond people have interesting responses to that sort of language. And I have to say to them, oh, you know, usually I'm making light of it, and usually I'm kind of minimising the experience and saying, oh yeah, it's fine, you know, I took some pills and I spoke to some people, and these days it's kind of okay. But I think that the sense of, like, it almost makes it sound fun. Almost makes it sound like, in the same way that you might have, like, you know, I once had to spend a night in Cardiff Airport waiting for an early flight. Tried to sleep in the airport. I was with my husband, and there was an arcade game called Crazy Taxi.
Oh,
and the reason I know the exact intonation of the jingle for that arcade game was because there was nowhere we could go in the hospital and in the airport and lie down and not hear that arcade game over and over and over and over and over again. And yeah, so calling things crazy kind of makes them a little bit fun. Oh my God, man, that's so crazy. But then when you apply it to a crazy person, people get quite sort of edgy and offended. And then when you're a crazy person who applies it to yourself, sometimes they kind of look as though they don't really know where to look.
I'm not sure where to go.
It's interesting.
That is interesting.
But yeah, good word. I like it.
So what have you got for us?
Well, I had a conversation with Ryan at 4 a.m. yesterday. Was it yesterday? Yeah, it was yesterday.
Who knows?
Who knows, because time is meaningless in the apocalypse. Time is also meaningless when you go to bed around about 1 a.m. and then your husband, who's been drinking quite strong beer as though it was water for most of the day, comes to bed around about 3, and that's you then basically awake until about 7 a.m. So thanks to the good old time differences and mobile phones working in the dark, I had a bit of a chat with Ryan because I was furious. I wanted to talk to somebody else about my terrible lot at having been kept awake for 4 hours. Now, Ryan, as a parent, as a multi-parent, was not hugely sympathetic. And I get that. That's understandable. You know, I know. In terms of how often my sleep is interrupted or disrupted, I'm quite a lucky human being. I'm quite fortunate in that respect. But it did get me to thinking while I was lying there, trying not to murder my snoring husband. Sleep.
Oh, cool.
Sleep is something that I really I love it quite a lot. I said to Ryan in this chat, one of the reasons why I'm not a parent, there are many, but one of the significant reasons is that I could never love something that fucked with my sleep quite as much as a small baby does. I just, there wouldn't be any kind of, but I love him or her so much that this is okay. I just couldn't deal with it. I just couldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I look at my friends who have kids and my friends who are single parents and you know, they don't sleep for weeks sometimes and they're exhausted all the time. And I can think of no worse terrible hell than not being allowed to sleep. So I thought I would have a bit of a look at this word and see what was going on. So the earliest citation in the OED for sleep is from around about 825. Now,
oh wow.
You know how I struggle with time in a lot of different ways, but 825 meant so much nothing to me that I looked up what was going on in the world in 825. Because, you know, sometimes I don't have a very good context of, like, I can think about, 16 whenever, okay, Shakespeare, or I can consider a war or an event or whatever, but 825, I don't know. So, here are some of the things that Wikipedia lists were going on in 825.
Cool.
In Britain, the Battle of Elundun, where King Edward of Wessex defeats Beornwulf of Mercia near Swindon. The battle marks the end of the Mercian domination of southern England. And I'm like, okay, yep, cool. We're back in the days where people were called things like Beornwulf.
Yeah.
I get it. Yep, it's good. And then we have King Hywel ap Rhodri of Gwynedd dies after an 11-year reign. The kingdom is seized by his grandnephew, Merfyn Frisch of Man. And I'm like, okay, right, so we're talking about Saxons and Mercia and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
We also have Borobudur, a Mahayana Buddhist temple, is completed in central Java, which is modern Indonesia. It's a long-ass time ago.
It is a long time ago. Jeez.
And so, people were sleeping, obviously, in those days. And what I found etymologically is that it's actually one of these words that's been pretty stable throughout the centuries. That citation from 825 has Don Selith Skildum his slep, S-L-E-P.
Ooh.
And what the OED has to say is, in Old English, slep, S-L thorn P, slap or slep. Old Frisian slep, West Frisian sleep, I-E-P. North Frisian sleep, S-L-I-P. Middle Dutch slep, Dutch slap. Old Saxon slap, slav, schlaf, schlaf. Various, but all, sort of Germanic, Dutch, Frisian, Old High German, all of these things, pretty stable. And what I found interesting too, that this reminded me of when I was a kid and I first went to school, and sometimes people would arrive late to school looking a bit dishevelled and rubbing their eyes, and they would say, I slept in. And my teacher, who was quite stern and a bit mean, she would get very angry at children saying they slept in. And it's another one of these classic Scots versus English scenarios, because in fact, in Scots, it's slep is the past tense of sleep.
Oh, that's interesting.
So being told off for not pronouncing that final T, it wasn't about that at all. It was kids who were used to speaking Scots, or who certainly were around people who were used to speaking Scots, and that was their dialect word.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we get slip and various different variations upon the vowel sound in the middle, which eventually becomes that duplicated E sound. Not regularly until Spenser and the Fairy Queen. But then, we know that spelling didn't really exist in those days.
Yeah, that's true.
Basically speaking. So the OED lists it as the unconscious state or condition regularly and naturally assumed by man and animals, and women, during which the activity of the nervous system is almost or entirely suspended and recuperation of its powers takes place. I like that.
Ooh.
Slumber or repose. We get the sense too of hypnotic or magnetic sleep. I liked magnetic sleep.
Yeah.
The word is further applied to the more inert condition of certain animals during hibernation. This is sleep, the noun. We also have sleep, the verb.
Right.
I feel a little bit like that. That was like, the sequel.
Yeah.
A little bit later, sleep, the verb. Oh, no, telling you lies, absolutely telling you lies, around about the same time for sleep as a verb, which makes sense.
Yeah.
It's a thing that we do. It's a noun and it's a verb from around about the same time. So
it's interesting though that I would have thought that there would have been some lag. Like it's like, yeah, it makes sense that they would both be words, but I don't know. I just thought it would either be considered a state or an action first.
Yeah,
it's interesting that they're the same time. I mean, yeah, usage versus written usage, but.
Yeah, we run up against written, like citation versus usage. But yeah, I agree. I thought that would be the case too. But no, they're around about the same. So we get various kind of nuances on the meaning, and for example, we get the sense of I love the way this is put. Etym Online says, "Sleep with," quote, "do the sex act with," is in Old English. Yeah, it sounds like something an alien would say. "Oh, I have observed the humans, they are doing the sex act." And that's, from Laws of King Alfred, sort of around about 900, we have people doing the sex act with, and this being referred to as, sleeping with that person.
So, sorry, sleeping with was euphemistic for sex in like the 10th century?
It was, yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's cool, isn't it? Interestingly, too, so we've got a pie route to look at here.
Cool.
Which I was very pleased about, because you know how I love pie.
Yeah.
And the pie route, sleb, to be weak or to sleep. Etym Online states this perhaps is connected to pie route sleg, that's S-L-E-G, which means to be slack or to be languid.
Interesting.
So sleg, this pie route, gives us cognates such as sleep, slack. It also gives us lax and languish, relax, release. Interestingly too, relish, both in terms of enjoying something and the stuff you put on your burger. Lease and lesser. And very interesting word, which I'd never seen before, algolagnia, that's A-L-G-O-L-A-G-N-I-A, which Etym Online defines as sadomasochism, or sexuality that fetishizes violence and pain. The algia bit, as in neuralgia, meaning pain, plus that slack root gives us algolagnia or algolania.
Interesting.
Yeah, interesting one. It also gives us catalectic, so coming back to this idea of sleep unconsciousness, but looseness or slackness, which makes sense. If you're a person with no science to fall back on, if you imagine that same alien that talks about doing the sex act with, observing a human being sleeping and being unaware of what that process is, human beings who are asleep are slack, they are loose, they are languid.
Yeah.
And this is interesting too. So, again from Etom Online, we get the personification of sleep from the late 14th century on the model of Latin somnus or Greek hypnos. And eventually we get to, I say eventually, we're still in Old English, we get to the figurative use of sleep as in the repose of death. And
okay.
that sense of, like going to sleep or the eternal sleep. The more kind of metaphorical, figurative sense of the word. We don't get putting an animal to sleep, as in euthanizing it, until 1923, which is, really, really quite late. But I got myself I had a little bit of a diversion here, because what it says in Etom Online, it says, to put an animal to sleep or to kill painlessly is recorded from 1923. A similar image is in cemetery. And cemetery, or a place set aside for burial of the dead, comes from a root, a PIE root that means to lie, as in to lie down. And given that I was thinking about all things sleepy, I was interested in this. So koiman, meaning to put to sleep, kaimai in Greek, I lie down, from this PIE root kai, K-E-I, which also gives us words for bed and couch and things like this. We find too, so there's an Old English word for cemetery, lichburg, and in fact in some churches you will hear of the lich gate, L-I-C-H.
Yes.
Yeah, and a lich is a large public burial ground not attached to a church, generally speaking. Now lich, coming from that PIE root to lie down, and lie and lich are not a million miles away from each other, meaning body or corpse. And lich gives us, I absolutely love this, Scot. It's only tangentially to do with sleep, but I enjoyed it so much.
Yeah.
Lich is thought to be cognate with and related to like. L-I-K-E.
Oh.
Like. Like literally means of the same body with a corresponding body.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, isn't that lovely? So it has the same body as another thing. It is like it.
Interesting.
Yeah. So there we have
That's very
lying
cool.
down and indeed going to sleep. Whether we're doing that forever in the cemetery or briefly until one is woken up by one's snoring husband. But, whether it's a short sleep, a long sleep, may you be slack and lying down and languid and enjoying it.
Yeah, no kidding. That's awesome. It's interesting that, so my sort of constant sort of vision understanding of how people have evolved is to move away from a sort of, maybe not comfort with, but acceptance of death. Like, I feel like we're more detached from our own mortality now than we've ever been as a species.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
At least in the places where I live, which is extraordinary privilege. But it's interesting. So it's interesting that they had a euphemistic, using sleep as a euphemism for death so early.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting to me, like it sort of, the not using it to refer to, painlessly killing animals until 1923. And I sort of go, well, yeah, I feel like before 1923, nobody had time to care what the animals thought or felt. Like you didn't put an animal to sleep, you killed it because.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, as history of English would point out a million times over, yeah, language reflects society. It reflects what humans are doing and what they are comfortable about and what they are uncomfortable about and what they talk about and what they don't talk about. And yeah, you're absolutely right. That says to me, before that point, animals just died. Simple as that.
Yeah.
And also that sort of stereotype of like oldie-timey children. I'm thinking about like The Red Pony. You read The Red Pony? Where the notion that a child would be upset by or cry at the death of an animal just was nonsensical.
Yeah. It's like,
so
why would they bother?
Yeah, animals die. That's that. Yeah, I agree. I think that we are we're really quite detached from death these days. And it's like, I keep harping on about this. I've said it to several people several times, but I'm really worried about the fallout, if you like, from the current situation and funerals. Like,
yeah,
I think that there are deep and lasting, meaningful, traumatic kind of things being stirred up by that sense that 5 people can gather to mark the life of a person who they loved.
Yeah.
You know, it's I think that amongst all the other many horrible, terrible things about this pandemic, I think that's a particularly long-lasting, far-reaching one.
Yeah, it's the idea that it both is claiming lives and also claiming the ability for people to grieve in the way that we've become accustomed to grieving.
Yeah.
Which is collectively.
The very last public gathering that I was at before this started, and I know it so well because the date that the schools were all closed was the 20th of March, and on the 19th of March I was at a funeral. I was at a family funeral, and quite literally, if the funeral had been arranged for one day later, we wouldn't have been able to attend. And you know, at that point, the government message was about keeping your distance and washing your hands and not getting too close to people and all the rest of it. And, you know, we went to this funeral and we all knew that. And we all still cried and hugged each other and held hands and did the things that people do when they're grieving.
Yeah.
And it was a bit like, well, shit, if one of us has it, we all have it now, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think too at that stage, you know, we perhaps weren't taking it quite as seriously as people then came to take it when they understood just how big a deal this was.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm very grateful that we were able to do that, because the thought of standing in an empty, socially distanced crematorium or church or, you know, wherever the funeral happens to happen, without being able to physically reach out to other human beings and comfort them and be comforted by them, I think is really, yeah, it's hard.
Yeah.
It's maybe too hard. That's what I'm worried about. I think it's maybe too hard.
Yeah.
Well, sleep. Yeah, sleep took us to some dark places.
It did. Yeah. On that uplifting
I don't know.
Note, crazy sleep.
I often say that my superpower is to just make the conversation really grim.
And what a superpower.
I'll sometimes say, I'm like, oh shit, I've brought the grim again, haven't I?
There's a theme tune in there. Here comes Amy bringing the grim.
And you know, I'm quite a bubbly, vivacious, cheerful sort of person, and I like to laugh, and I do have quite a black sense of humour, so maybe I'm not always laughing at classically funny things, but yeah, I don't know what it is. I find myself quite often bringing the grim.
Well, that's why that would be your theme song. It couldn't be a somber Death March theme song. It has to be a bubbly
cheerful
70s
bringing the
sitcom
grim
theme song. Yeah. And that's it for another episode of Lexitecture. To get in touch with us about something you heard in this episode, you can email us at words@lexitecture.com. You can also follow along and talk to us at Lexitecture on Facebook and Twitter, and at Lexitecture Podcast on Instagram. For back episodes and the occasional blog post, visit us at lexitecture.com. Thanks very much, and we'll talk to you again soon.